Dorsey Jackson Global.
It has begun.
All my life, I have never been one to believe in ghosts. I was a man of science and always believed that there was a coherent explanation for everything. But there was a time in my life when I started to doubt those beliefs as something really strange started to happen in my apartment. I first noticed it after I'd gone grocery shopping. I'd bought enough food and snacks to stock the fridge and little pantry that I had in my apartment. I remember eating well that night and saving some leftovers for the next day. I went to bed, and after some time, when I woke up the next morning, I decided to warm up last night's leftovers for breakfast. But when I opened my fridge, I couldn't find them. Shocked, I wondered what could have happened to the leftovers that I left the night before. At first, I thought I had kept them somewhere else and forgotten about it, so I looked around a little bit more in the fridge. But no matter how much I looked, they had completely disappeared. As I kept searching through my fridge, I realized something that was very odd. The leftovers weren't the only thing that were missing, as a substantial amount of other food items were gone too. I was completely baffled now, so I looked into my little pantry to see if any food items there were missing too, and as I opened it, I realized that my pantry had also been ransacked. My mind was struggling to come up with a substantial explanation as to why my food was disappearing, and my first feasible thought was that it had to be rats. I quickly realized how stupid that was, as even I knew that rats weren't capable of opening fridges and pantries, and even if they could, there would obviously be traces of crumbs or something. The strange phenomenon left me speechless for a while as I kept racking my brain. I knew I was home alone all through yesterday, so no one else could have taken the food items. It took me a while, but I eventually snapped out of it and went on with my day. I remember telling one of my friends about it, and he made a joke saying, "Maybe it's a starving poltergeist. I mean, I've always told you that ghosts were real, and maybe this one is a chubby ghost who just wants to steal your food." I didn't laugh at this joke, so he continued with, "Chill out, dude. Maybe it's just your mind playing tricks on you, or maybe you're just becoming forgetful, but you'll find those missing food items, trust me." My friend's words put my mind at ease, and I eventually decided to shrug it off and forget about the whole thing. When I got home that night, I saw my girlfriend was waiting for me in my apartment. She was sitting on the couch watching a movie, and that's when I remembered that I had given her a key. I immediately wanted to ask if she was the one taking my food, but I stopped myself. We hadn't been going out long, but I didn't think she was a thief, so I decided to let it slide. We both slept at my apartment that night, and the next morning, when I opened the fridge, the food was significantly smaller than what I had left there last night. I decided to ignore this, as I told myself that it couldn't have been her. I was completely sure that she was with me all through the night, so there was no way it could have been her. But as the week passed by, more and more food items were going missing, and it reached a point where I couldn't take it anymore. So I confronted my girlfriend. I remember telling her, "I know this is a weird question, but I need you to tell me the truth. Are you the person who's been taking my food from my apartment?" Shocked, she looked at me and said, "What the heck are you talking about? What do you mean taking food from your apartment?" I then looked her dead in the eyes as I said, "Well, for the past week now, a lot of food items have been going missing from my fridge, and I'm 100% sure that I'm not the one taking it. Plus, you're the only person who has a key to my apartment, in addition to free access to my fridge." I could tell she was angry now as she looked at me and said, "What's that supposed to mean? Are you accusing me of stealing food from you? Because if you are, you've completely lost your mind. I don't need you to feed me." Things just escalated from there, and it didn't take long before we got into a very heated argument. I eventually left the apartment before things got any worse, as I wanted to clear my head. I walked around for a while before getting an incredible idea. On my way back home, I stopped at a store and bought a little security camera. When I got back home, I set the camera in a position that directly pointed at the fridge and my pantry. While my girlfriend had vehemently denied ever stealing from me, I didn't fully believe her, as I knew not to blindly trust the words that came out of her mouth. I convinced myself that she had been sneaking into my apartment when I was home alone to take the food items, so I decided to personally catch her red-handed by using the camera to film her and get her stealing from me on tape. There was no way she was going to be able to deny it if I showed her the irrefutable footage. So I made sure she didn't see me setting up the camera. After a while, I eventually started feeling sleepy, but I was a bit thirsty too, so I decided to get a cup of water from the fridge. When I was done, I went to bed, and I finally felt myself dozing off. I didn't know when I finally slept off, but when I woke up the next morning, the first thing I did was to check my fridge. Surely enough, numerous items had gone missing, so I rushed to check the camera's footage. I had a smile on my face as I couldn't wait to confront my girlfriend with the hard proof that I had acquired. But as I kept watching the footage, my confidence turned into terror as I saw an unknown woman climbing out of the small storage space in my ceiling. I tried, but I couldn't make out her face as her hair covered most of it. Horrified, I watched as she started to roam my fridge and pantry. As the footage kept playing, I felt a crippling fear fill each and every inch of my body as I watched how she ran to hide when I came out for a glass of water. Numerous horrific scenarios played out in my head as I realized that this woman could have killed me last night. The video was now nearing its end as I watched the woman go back into the small storage space that she crawled out of. This meant that she was probably still in my apartment. When the footage was finally done, it took a lot of strength, but I tried to keep myself from screaming. I knew I couldn't apprehend the strange woman on my own, so I calmly called the cops. When the cops arrived, I quickly showed them the footage, and the woman was immediately taken out of the storage space and arrested. The cops believed that she had been living there for a while now, and they told me I was lucky to have found her, as it was only a matter of time before the strange woman did something really morbid. I was scared shitless after that incident, and I remember asking my friend if I could stay at his place for a couple of days, as I didn't want to stay in my apartment for some time. It's been a while since this happened, and numerous security measures have been put in place to make sure it doesn't happen again. I still check the storage space from time to time, as the paranoia really gets to me sometimes. I also started to live by a very famous quote, as nowadays, I pretty much sleep with one eye open. Most kids get excited at the possibility of a night alone without parent supervision. Usually that means staying up late, watching scary movies, and eating junk food. That's what I envisioned that night in October as I pleaded and negotiated with my parents. "I'm 11 years old now," I said as if I were a mature adult. "I don't need a babysitter. Please?" My parents were going out of town for a work-related night out, and after a lot of pleading, begging, and immature whining, they budged and allowed me to stay home alone. "It's only one night," my dad whispered to my worried mom in a consoling tone. "You'll be all right." I ran to my room excited for the upcoming night of unsupervised fun. It wouldn't take long for that excitement to morph into panic and terror, as it became the worst night of my life. Before long, my mom was kissing me goodbye and smiling worriedly. "You call us if you need anything at all. Got it?" "Yes, Mom." I rolled my eyes. I placed my glass of water on the coffee table in the living room and let my mom embrace me. We finished our goodbyes, and before long, the door closed. I was alone, unsupervised for the first time in my life. Fear began to creep into the pit of my stomach. What if something bad actually happened? Who would I call? What would I do? I heard my parents' car pull out of the driveway, and the tingling fear became stronger, flooding into my head. I ran upstairs to my bedroom that gave me a clear view to the front of the house. My parents were still in the driveway, pulling out. I watched them, forehead against the glass, as rain began to fall on the window, obscuring my view of the car driving away. The car grew distant, smaller and smaller. They turned left at the end of our street. They were gone. I stayed frozen, face against the glass. I regretted asking to stay alone. What if there was an emergency? What if I burnt down the house? My eyes became heavy with tears. I continued to stare out the window for minutes, hoping their car would reappear, turning into our street and into our driveway, where they'd tell me their event was canceled and they'd stay home with me. The light post on the corner of the street flickered on, breaking me out of my daze. It was getting dark. "Okay," I whispered to myself. "If I don't do anything stupid, I'll be fine. I began to move away from the window when something caused me to turn back. Under the light post, two figures turned the corner and walked toward my end of the street. They wore black sweaters and pants and looked paranoid. One person looked around constantly, while the other hit his arm and gestured to keep looking forward. I stared as the panic began to set in again. Were they coming here? No way. That'd be ridiculous, right? The figures passed the first house on the street. They passed the second one. They passed the third. My house was next. Keep walking, I whispered in a trembling voice. But they didn't keep walking. The pair of men stopped in front of my house as one gestured at the empty driveway. They argued. The rain began to come down harder. They approached my front door. I could hear my heart beating in my chest now. I let out a small yelp as the doorbell rang. What did they want? Why were they here? I came down the stairs quietly and stood over the welcome mat by the entrance. I stared at the door as the door chimed again. I pressed my ear close to the cold wooden door. I could hear them now. You see, one said, there's no one here. I saw them carrying luggage into their car and saw them drive off. They're not coming back for the night. I don't know, man, said the other, tone oozing with paranoia. Shut up, the other one said. The door handle began to jiggle violently. I pressed my hands close to my mouth to suppress a scream. Fuck it, the paranoid one said. Let's go through the window and get off the street. Everyone can see us. Before I had time to react, the window next to the door exploded, causing shards of glass to rain onto the hardwood floor. Without time to think, I sprinted upstairs. This cannot be happening, I repeated to myself as I glided up the stairs as quietly as possible. I glanced back down the stairs as I turned into my parents' bedroom. A body emerged from the shattered window, causing my stomach to drop. I shut the door and rushed under the bed. Had they seen me? Did they hear the door clicking shut? Did they know I was here? I laid on my stomach, my mind assuming the worst. From my hiding spot, I stared at the small slit of light under the door. Glass shattering broke out from downstairs. The scratching of furniture being dragged across the floor followed. And finally, voices broke out. Someone's here, said a calm but firm voice. What? How do you know? Said another. Fear surrounding every word. This water, it's cold. There's still ice in it. Under the bed, I broke out in cold sweat after hearing these words. I focused to hear anything else, but nothing followed. The silence was deafening. Minutes passed of complete silence that felt like an eternity. Suddenly, the soft, subtle cracking of the wooden floor creaked. The soft click of a door being shut quietly followed. They were in my room. I stared at the slit of light under the door. The creaking continued, crescendoing and nearing. My panic grew. My fear became a reality. Two dark spots suddenly appeared under the door, blocking the bright strip of light coming from outside my parents' room. They were here. The door opened slowly. I could now see two pairs of feet under the threshold. I know you're here, said a calm voice. It sounded taunting and playful. You can come out. We won't hurt you. The other voice snickered. Unmoving, I stared as the two men separated. They went around the perimeter of the bed, and I quickly lost sight of one. The other stood directly in front of me. I could have reached out and grabbed his shoelace. I wonder where he is, said the one in front of me. Is he in the closet? Behind the curtains? Or perhaps he may be under the bed. As he said the last word, a pair of hands grabbed my ankles and began pulling me. I shrieked in terror, but an enormous hand covered my mouth. I struggled, kicked, and flailed to no avail. Two enormous arms engulfed me, leaving me immobile. The man that had stood in front of me approached. Sleep, he whispered. He brought a moist cloth and placed it over my mouth and nose. Everything began to go dark. Seconds later, I lost consciousness. I woke up in a dark and damp room. I laid on cold cement over a thin blanket. My body ached. My mouth was incredibly dry. I sat up groggy, and my eyes adjusted to the dim light. A single light bulb hung from a wire in the middle of the room that was void of any windows or decorations. I scanned the perimeter, trying to orient myself with no success. In the corner of the room, a flight of stairs led up. Minutes passed when a loud pop rang from above. Muffled screaming broke out and banging and crashing followed. I recoiled and curled up on the ground, covering the back of my head with my hands. The scuffle overhead intensified as a series of loud pops continued. Then, complete and total silence. A minute passed, and the silence was broken. The loud creak of a heavy door being opened echoed through the damp room. I shut my eyes tight, ready for more pain. "Mike," came a strong voice. "Mike, are you in here?" I remained silent. "This is Police Officer Gordon. I am here to help." I looked up, gave out a cry of acknowledgement, and felt hope for the first time in days. Tears flowed from my mom's eyes as she hugged me tightly after being reunited at the police station. For what seemed like an eternity, my parents both embraced me in the detective's office. I could have stayed in their embrace forever. Finally, Officer Gordon explained that the pair of burglars had been watching my house for days. They noticed my parents left with luggage, and they assumed they would be gone for an extended period of time. As soon as they drove off, they pounced at the opportunity of an empty house ready for looting. But as they discovered I was there, they were unsure what to do. I was a hiccup in their plan. They drugged me and placed me in the basement of their house. However, as they carried my unconscious body and placed it in the back of their truck that was hidden around the corner of our street, a camera atop the light post caught their license plate. The very next day, my parents arrived, and before minutes, my house was full of detectives and police officers. After some digging, the lamppost camera footage was used to locate my kidnappers. Decades have passed since that horrible day, and I am eternally thankful that the camera was placed on that lamppost. I sometimes think of what horrible fate would have followed if that footage hadn't been discovered.
My name's Roy, and I'm 25 years old. Since I moved out on my own, I've been very cautious. I lock all the doors, close all the windows, and make sure I have all the police and emergency numbers handy. People call me paranoid, but not everyone knows how dangerous it can be to give someone a chance to enter your home because you don't know who you might meet. I learned this lesson the hard way 15 years ago. And every time I question whether I'm being too exaggerated, I remember what happened that night and realize that a little extra security never hurts. I was only 10 years old, and it was my first night alone. My parents were divorced, and my dad wasn't a big fan of babysitters, as he didn't trust inviting a stranger into your home to watch your child. I usually lived with my mother, but she had to go on a business trip. And although my father spent every weekend with me, on weekdays, I didn't know anything about his life. My mother forced my dad to take care of me for that week, and my dad told her that he was taking a vacation to be with me, but he lied. He had already taken a leave a month ago to go to another country with his new girlfriend, and even though he didn't tell me, I saw his messages with her, and I knew it was true. Without the vacation, my dad got engaged to my mom, and when he talked to me, he told me that he had to work and that I could take care of myself. I was already old, and he knew that I was very responsible. He promised me not to say anything to my mom, and I agreed. I wanted to be alone too. It was my chance to prove to the world that I could take care of myself. When he left for work, my dad locked all the doors and left me the keys. He also left me all the emergency numbers close by, with his on top of everything if anything should happen. He also left me prepared food that I only had to reheat, and lots of treats to eat only after dinner. He told me that to make sure I did everything, there were cameras all over the house and that he would watch me at all times. But I knew that was a lie. Otherwise, he would have told me before or shown them to me. After all this, my father grabbed all the stuff and left, leaving me alone in his apartment. The moment he left, I was running to open the candy and stuffed all of it in my mouth without a second thought. I knew that after dinner, I would want to eat more, so I saved a few for later and went to watch TV. After a few minutes, I fell asleep with my belly full of treats and the TV on. I was dreaming about my pets at my mom's house until suddenly, a loud noise woke me up. The doorbell was ringing incessantly, as if someone who knew the place wasn't empty had been ringing for a while. I was terrified that I hadn't slept all day, and the doorbell ringer was my angry dad. But when I saw the time, I realized that it would still be a long time before he arrived. I put on my flip-flops and approached the door. On the other side was a woman. She looked familiar, but I couldn't try to remember who she was. I asked her what she wanted, and she told me she was the neighbor my dad sent to take care of me. I told her that my dad had left me alone, but she said he changed his mind on the way downstairs and sent her to make sure everything was okay for a few minutes. I wasn't sure if I believed her, but within seconds she said, "Come on, open up, Roy, or your dad'll get mad." This woman looked very familiar. She knew my father was working and knew my name, so I believed her and opened up. As she walked in, she thanked me with a strange smile and started asking me if I had done my homework, to which I replied surprisingly that I was on vacation since it was the middle of January. She just laughed, ignored me, and told me to watch TV and hurried into my father's room. I saw out of the corner of my eye what she was doing, and she was rummaging through everything as if she was looking for something. I asked what she was doing, and she told me that my father had told her to get his money from him and to give it to her because she wanted to buy a surprise for his favorite son. At that moment, I didn't notice how strange it was that my father didn't know where his own money was, and I just got excited about the surprise I was going to get. After a few minutes, the girl violently broke the drawer of a closed cabinet and took out a pile of money, to which she reacted by laughing frantically. She stuffed everything into a bag and was leaving, but I stopped her and asked her to warm up my food before she left. At first, she just looked at me angrily, but then she gave me a big smile and said she'd be happy to warm up my food. Suddenly, she rushed over to me and hugged and squeezed me violently. I started to cry in desperation, but she paid no attention, just pulled me over to the kitchen chair and told me to stay still or she would hurt me. Terrified, I obeyed. The girl tied me to the chair with a rope she had found while going through my father's things and started boiling water. She would probably make me the noodles my dad had on top of the fridge. I told her I wasn't hungry anymore, but she ignored me. After a few minutes, she asked if I was thirsty and wanted some water, to which I told her I'd prefer some orange juice. I asked her if she could untie me since the ropes were tight, and again, she did not answer me. I wanted to ask her if she would serve me juice, but my thoughts were interrupted by an indescribable sensation of pain. The girl was pouring all the hot boiling water slowly on my head. She was dripping it slowly, and the water was running all over my face and body. I screamed desperately and tried to free myself, but there was no solution. I felt my face starting to melt and my vision beginning to blur. The girl started to run the hot water all over the rest of my body, ensuring that none of my parts were dry, while she laughed nonstop. When she ran out of the water, I was still screaming, to which she reacted by slapping me hard across the face as she continued to laugh. Almost without understanding anything, I heard banging on the door and voices asking me if everything was all right. The woman went to open the door and worriedly told the neighbors that I had an accident and needed help. As the neighbors came in to see me, she ran out of the house in desperation, taking all my father's money with her. The neighbors who came to help me saw me and screamed in surprise when they saw my condition, and they untied me and desperately called the ambulance. I was never able to recover from what happened. I received permanent wounds and marks all over my body and could not leave the hospital for a long time. Eventually, I found out that that woman was my dad's ex-girlfriend, with whom he had gone on a vacation a month before, but they had a very violent fight. The girl looked familiar to me because some of the pictures I saw of her when I was checking my father's cell phone. And I also remembered how I had seen them arguing loudly in chat rooms, and she constantly threatened to hurt me, but my father never took her seriously. After the hospital, I didn't see my father for years, not because he didn't want to see me, but because my mother denied him until I was of age and could decide independently. My father didn't try to take any legal action against her, as he felt very guilty about what happened and felt that maybe he deserved it. Today, my relationship with him has improved a little, but I never go into his apartment again because every time I see him from a distance, the marks that are permanently left on my skin start to burn again.